Hey everybody, this is Rebecca from Ontario Soccer, and you're listening to our latest podcast. For this episode, I had a chance to interview Cody Royle, a renowned author and speaker that has dedicated his career to coaching head coaches. Through his work, Cody helps coaches at the highest levels in sport navigate the various aspects of their role and really excel in the art of coaching. We covered a lot of ground in this conversation, from the traits of a good leader to how coaches can make stronger connections with their players and how to prevent burnout. Cody offers up a lot of really great insights here for everybody in the Ontario soccer community, whether you're a coach or an administrator, a player, or even a parent. Without any further ado, let's hear from Cody. We have a very special guest with us today, Cody Royle. Thanks for paying us a visit. How are you?
Rebecca, I'm fantastic. Thank you. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. For those who aren't familiar with Cody, he is a distinguished author, speaker, and mentor, renowned for his expertise in coaching and leadership development. He's essentially a coach of coaches, currently working with 13 head coaches, if that's right, 17 sports in 5 different countries. So can you tell me a little bit more about the work that you're currently doing?
Yeah, well, coaching is my background. So I spent about a decade with Canada's Aussie Rules program, or AFL, as most people know it. I was the head coach there, so running my own team and staff and players all over the country, and so that gave me a background in team dynamics and organizational dynamics and the nuances of the head coaching role. And then I started writing most of my books about those kind of things, and that gave me opportunities to work directly with head coaches. So there's this emerging discipline of coaches having head coaches. It's not just me. Pep Guardiola has his own coach that goes around with him and has since Barcelona days. So it started to become a little bit more mainstream, and so yeah, I'm one of those.
All right, so what is it, you talked a little bit about your background and the way you made your way into this career, but what is it that drew you to the career? What is it that inspires you and makes you want to do this?
Well, initially it was my experience as a player, and I was an overthinker, and I kind of thought my way out of a professional career, which is a lot of people's story, I think. How they have paralysis by analysis. That's actually an advantage in a lot of coaching disciplines, in the thinking through and meticulous thinking and planning and where everyone should run and organising. And so that's what got me interested in the coaching discipline. And then really I spent 15 years trying to figure out how to be a good head coach. And so now that's just become really what I focus on. And what I love about that in particular is coaching has become so big. There's so much responsibility. We're not talking about, the kind of Alex Ferguson days of like one head coach and an assistant coach, and that's all that's on staff, and it's small and contained and all those. We're talking about big operations with multiple coaches, multiple assistant coaches, a goalkeeping coach, an analyst, an athletic trainer, a strength and conditioning coach, and you're at 15 technical staff before you kind of even get started. And then there's, this better than most, and there's the marketing department, and the head coach in clubs needs to play into that. And so it's a huge challenge before you even start to plan training session, get out on the grass with team. I like that complexity. It kind of plays into that overthinking player that I was, in trying to solve that complexity with and for coaches.
So what would you say is your mission, or like the purpose behind what you're doing? What's your goal?
Great question. Mine is to prepare head coaches to be capable of championship performance. So that's not to say they're always going to be winning championships. It's to be capable of it, and that requires a well-rounded skill set. It requires a lot of different skills, and it requires your obvious strengths and heightening those, but also maybe working on things that you're not as familiar with. And so the mission is to really look at specifically the head coach position, the demands on that position, and really pinpointing what that person is going to need. A lot of those things don't get covered in coach education or coach development. They kind of throw a lot of tech and tack things at coaches and then leave it at that. There's so much more to it than that.
So I know this is your life's work. This is probably a very loaded question, but if you had to narrow it down to just a few sentences, what is the role of an athletics coach or a sports coach? What does that job entail?
Well, really, it's to create behavior change. And, that includes, you were talking about being in track and fields, or we came on air, and so it's the same there. It's the same in, if you were to go and get a personal trainer who is your coach to lift weights, they're trying to create behavior change in what you do and teach you new things that allow you to develop certain skills and change the way that you behave and interact with the world. And so I think those core ideas of like what coaching is hold true, whichever discipline you can see it in, executive coaching or leadership coaching, what I'm doing now, coaching coaches or coaches coaching teams. They're trying to give people a reason to change their behavior. And that's the core underlying idea.
So if you had to say, what is it that separates a good coach from a great coach?
Well, yeah, the great ones, I think, have instincts for it. They have an instinct for what to do when they don't know what to do, how to interact with particularly their players, but also now, the staff and the organisation. I honestly don't think it's a lot to do with particular training modules or level of education. I think there's an intuition or an instinct that the greats tend to have, and it tends to show up in game scenarios. It tends to show up in that idea of they know when to make the substitution, or they know when to say something to a particular player. They're kind of these when questions, and that comes from a bit of a gut feel. And the great thing about that is, again, it's underappreciated, but we don't cover it in how we educate coaches, that you can have these gut feels. If you listen to them, you can actually train that part of your intuition and your instincts to try to read things and see when is the right time to make that substitution or make that comment to that player.
Cody joined us a few months ago virtually, delivering a webinar called How to Accelerate Your Coaching Performance. During that webinar, you talked in depth about awareness, communication, and decision-making being the three crucial skills that any coach should have in their repertoire. Why is it those three things?
Yeah, so those are the primary coaching skills, and they're the primary skills because they're always present in basically any coaching activity that you can do. So they're always on, right? Like your awareness is your ability to perceive where you are, what you're doing, who's in the room, pay attention to a particular thing in a drill or in a game. So that kind of plugs into that like instinct and intuition that I was mentioning earlier. And communication, you're always communicating, even body language, and even if you were to go deeper, in one of my books I talk about the idea of like self-talk, and now that's not traditionally thought of as a communication skill, but of course it is. You talk to yourself all the time. Mm-hmm. And so when you bundle all those things together, there's always communication happening. And then same with decision making as the third primary skill is you're always having to make decisions as a leader. Certainly that's what you're tasked with doing. A lot of them are tough decisions, some aren't. And so you're always perceiving, communicating what you've seen and deciding based on what you've seen and what you've said. And it's kind of this repetitious cycle, and that happens whether you're in a one-on-one meeting with a player, out of the training field, in a game, delivering a team talk, all of those three things are constantly in action. And so that's the reason they're the primary skills. They can be worked on, they can be developed. And so a lot of my work with coaches is centered around those three things. How do you make them better?
So circling back to that communication piece, for all of the coaches that we have listening or watching this podcast, if they ever struggle maybe to build a relationship with an athlete or struggle to just be in line with one another and understand one another, what are some tips that you might have for coaches to strengthen that communication piece with their athletes?
Well, they're not players, they're people. And so I would think about it, whatever their age is, you're trying to learn about why this person behaves the way they do, or what their background is, or trying to gather some idea of who they are as a person and how they've shaped how they perceive the world. And so my tip would be to think about that, and all of a sudden, you might want to go on a walk with a player. And, so walking meetings are different from us sitting like this, right? We might actually talk about different things if we were facing each other versus if we were shoulder to shoulder. You might tell me something more personal about yourself because we have a power dynamic and a back and forth dynamic going on in this. And so if we were to change how we were, the environment we were in while we were communicating, we would talk about different things. And so the same is true of a player. You could even just walk around a pitch side by side with a player and ask them about themselves and their parents and grandparents and what they're interested in, and how they end up studying what they study. And that kind of depersonalizes a lot of the issues that you might be having with the player, but also allows you to potentially solve the problem in a way that makes sense to that person because you understand how they make sense to the world.
So, Cody, your books, Where Others Won't and The Tough Stuff, have received widespread acclaim for their insights into coaching and leadership. Could you share with us a few more tips or actionable takeaways from your books that coaches could implement into their practices or training immediately?
I haven't read my own books for a while, so someone else might be better placed to answer that. But Where Others Won't is a book about innovation and thinking differently about challenging problems, specifically to do with people. So, I have this phrase, people innovation, and linking those two ideas together. And so that's really trying to be different or unique about how you recruit, how you build culture, how you lead, and then how you kind of measure performance. And so, the presentation that I gave earlier to the technical director's diploma was about a lot of those ideas. So, there's a lot of complaints about staff and onboarding staff and attracting staff. And so one actionable tip in that sense is, let's look at our job descriptions. All right, and they tend to be very much the same. Everyone has exactly the same one, right? It's kind of this structured way of doing it, years for salary, location. We might write that you're after someone with great written and verbal communication skills. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
So even thinking through that, well, what do I actually mean by that? What does a good written communicator look like? We live in a city where every second person isn't born in Canada. So are you talking about great communication skills about how they speak versus how they write an email? What happens when you factor in English as a second language or a third language? What happens when you factor in they might be able to talk about football in a particular way, but maybe not other areas of life in that same way?
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, there's that I see as being innovative within your people processes. So if you're talking about wanting to attract staff and better staff, and you really need to think through, well, we've just slapped this, we want someone with great communication skills. well, tell me what that means, because then we can go and find that type of person. So that would be one from Where Others Wine, is think differently about your people and the processes that you have around your people. And the tough stuff is a book about the emotional toll of head coaching, but really leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And my core belief in what I'm doing is that coaches and really leaders need to take better care of themselves. That starts with them. And so a lot of the problems that coaches have with the broader teams are created by the coach. How they're showing up, their body language, the way that they speak, the way that they maybe dismiss someone or a comment or something like that. Ultimately, the core challenge starts with the coach. And so it's usually because they're tired, they're time poor, they've got so much to deal with, maybe not the skills to deal with all of it. And so again, I know it's asking a lot, particularly of people in the youth system where there's less time, because often they're working a job as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a little bit like the advice that you give to parents, in that you need to take care of yourself so that you can take care of your children.
Mm-hmm.
That's my advice to coaches, is find little ways to take care of yourself so that you can show up better, so that you can lead your players.
Okay. So we'll get back to coaches in just a minute, because I know that's your bread and butter. But we also have a lot of parents who are going to be watching and listening to this podcast. So I'm sure you have some tips for them as well, with all of your expertise in this world. So from your perspective, what's the role of a parent when it comes to an athlete's sports career? And how does it kind of balance out with the role of a coach?
Well, the first thing I'll say is I don't live this every day, and so the people that do are probably more knowledgeable than me. One of the things working in pro sport is you don't have the parent angle there as strongly, at least.
I know.
They're still there, but not as strongly. In answering your question, there was an interview with Evan Ferguson, who plays for Brighton in the Premier League, scored a hat-trick in the last round of Premier League games before we're doing this interview. I asked him about his dad and his dad's role in his development. And his dad was a professional player in Ireland. So he's an 18-year-old kid, and I asked him about the role that his dad played. Did you get advice from your dad who played professionally? And he says, my dad stood at the back corner, and like literally in the corner with his hood pulled over, and he like tightened it like kind of Kenny from South Park. He didn't yell anything, didn't talk to me, didn't give me advice. He let the coaches coach me. And I just think there's so much in that. It was about giving control to the young man in his own development and letting him drive it. He could take on what his coach was offering. He could go to his dad if he needed, or when he needed.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, he had left it to the player and the coach to decide the trajectory of the player. Now, he's just scored, as an 18-year-old, a hat-trick in the Premier League. So I think he's doing okay.
Yeah.
So my advice is, I know it's difficult, but coaches are there to help, to guide players, to change their behaviour, to try to offer them something that can help them develop life skills, but also footballing skills. I think when parents interfere, I think that becomes troublesome and doesn't lead to the best outcome, really, for anyone.
So what would be some do's and don'ts for the parent community?
Stop yelling out. Stop yelling out instructions based on what you think could be one. I'm saying that because my mum used to do that to me, and it's all I could hear. There used to be 1,000 people watching, and all you can hear is your mum's voice. And so, again, I think that's quite disruptive, and because the as a parent, you often don't know the context of what the coach is trying to achieve. It might be tactically or with that particular player. And my do would be to try to speak to the coach more often and understand what it is that they are trying to do. How are they trying to change the behavior of your son or daughter or the team that they're playing on, or, ask them what journey this coach envisions for the team or the player. And try to get on board with understanding what that is. So make yourself more knowledgeable rather than, I think what we kind of do is no one talks. The coaches don't want to talk to the parents don't want to talk to the coaches. The player kind of has to sit in between and then almost act as an intermediary between the two. Like, that's not a good result for our kids. And so I think we can all be adults about it, and parents can have conversations with the coach, and the coach should be able to communicate what it is they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, it all goes back to that communication piece.
It does.
Instead of first. I want to go back now to coaches and a little bit for our players who may be watching. Something that you talk about a lot is burnout, and we touched on that a little bit a few minutes ago. But in soccer, from youth leagues all the way up to professional, there's so much that a player has to do, like with any sport. There's games, there's practices, there's training, maybe in the weight room or anything else. Then there's nutrition and recovery. And for coaches, there's all of that, and then there's also the administrative work. There's just so much happening all the time. So what would be your best tips for players and coaches to navigate all of that without getting themselves to a point of burnout?
Yeah, well, it's tough because it's intense, and it's getting more intense. Like, if you think about at the professional level now, that the whole organisation is kind of seeing themselves as a content house more than a professional football team. And so there's cameras everywhere, and you can't, so you're presenting in front of a worldwide audience as well as to your team, and so finding those small little moments to take a breath and get some rest and rejuvenation is tough. But that's my advice, really, is I don't think those demands are going to become any less. I don't see teams or leagues or governing bodies taking away games and training sessions. I think those are there, and so it's finding opportunities to rejuvenate as much as possible whilst we're still in that. And so it could be, that's why I love mindfulness and meditation as a discipline, is that you can practice and teach yourself to calm yourself down in 2 minutes, or have these kind of like micro naps where you can just kind of zone out. And if you've ever been able to kind of have a 5-minute nap and felt how you're just a little bit more mentally clear, if you've ever experienced that, you'll know what I'm talking about. But there are little things that you can do to train yourself so that you can just sit in silence with yourself and listen to your own body. And that is scientifically much more effective than currently what we're doing with trying to solve burnout, is giving people an extra week vacation. But often it's not the time off that they need, it's respite from a dysfunctional organisation, which doesn't matter how long your break is, you still walk back into the same organisation. So it doesn't actually solve the burnout. And so what people much smarter than me that study this stuff full time are saying is, let's learn to take these little opportunities to try to rest and rejuvenate, stop thinking about the ball or the politics or parents or whatever it is. So can you find a minute just to kind of sit back and regroup? So I worked through that with basically all of my coaches, because it also benefits them going in front of 100,000 people in the stadium. Sometimes they need to take a minute at half time before they go in and deliver a talk to the team. So can they just center themselves, get a little bit of a rest, and be more present? And so I think that's a good step towards trying to solve the burnout issue. It's not the only step that we need to take, but it's one of them.
So I know we've covered a lot of ground. I just want to ask you one more thing. any trends or anything you see on the horizon in the field of leadership development or coaching that you think is something our audience should know about, or something that you're excited about? Just anything on the horizon.
Well, we've kind of talked about a few of them. The well-being is certainly one. Coaches having coaches is the other one, and I'm biased in saying this. You can start to see trends towards that, and it's not just me saying that. But really what it is it's a new model of leadership. It allows for additional decision-making and problem-solving and additional clarity, because often decisions are made in amongst the fogginess of the day-to-day work that isn't the best decision. And so someone who kind of sits outside the organisation that isn't kind of jaded by either the politics that are going on or whatever it may be, to be a sidekick to help solve that problem or think through a good process, or even just practice how you want to have a difficult conversation with the staff member before you get to do it, is extraordinarily valuable. And I'm in the middle of writing a book about this right now. It's my third book, but when you really look at leadership and the leaders that we admire, a lot of them actually have a coach. Steve Jobs had a coach. They've written a book about that guy. Bill Campbell is his name. Like I said to you earlier, Pep Guardiola, who everyone copies everything he does, also has a coach. It's the one thing that they don't copy about him. But he has someone, and has had someone 15 years, who he goes to when he needs a moment of pause. So anyway, there are a lot of the top-end leaders that we admire and we look to for what to do and what the trends are, who are getting support from having a second set of eyes, just help them clarify things and make better decisions. And so that is something that doesn't need to be reserved for Steve Jobs or Pep Guardiola. It's something we can do at every level. In our youth clubs, we have a multitude of head coaches that can potentially coach each other. University athletic departments are the same. Why can't our volleyball coach work directly with our track and field coach, our football coach, and our basketball coach pair up, and they just carve out an hour a week and talk about what they're both going through, coach each other. So it doesn't need to be this expensive, executive coach for Steve Jobs. A lot of us have the resources right in front of us to be able to facilitate that. It's like a dualistic version of leadership.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today for this podcast episode. For those who want to hear more from Cody, you can visit codyroyle.com and learn more about your two books, and I guess there's another one on its way.
Soon to be three, yep.
Yeah, and I hear you also have a podcast series they can tune into, is that right?
Yeah, it's called Where Others Won't. It's about leadership in general, so they're more sort of business leaders and academics and coaches and people from all different walks of life. So it's very varied. So it's on all the major podcast platforms.
Okay, great. And you're on social media too, I assume?
I am. I'm on X, formerly known as Twitter.
Yes.
I'm very easy to find. With a name like Cody Royle, I'm very easy to find.
To hear more of Cody's coaching insights, check out Ontario Soccer's newly released Grassroots webinar series, where Cody delivers a presentation called How to Accelerate Your Coaching Performance. Cody will also be joining us in February at York University for the 2024 Ontario Soccer Summit. Ticket holders can opt into an in-person session with Cody, and will have the chance to network with him throughout the weekend. In the meantime, be sure to check out Cody's website, his social media, and his podcast, Where Others Won't. Cody also has a number of books you can dive into: The Tough Stuff, Where Others Won't, and his newest, Second Set of Eyes, which was released just a few weeks ago and is sure to be another hit. Thank you so much for tuning into this interview. Be sure to follow Ontario Soccer across our social media channels to keep up with all the latest updates, and subscribe to our newsletter, Inside the 18. We're looking forward to bringing you way more content just like this in 2024. So drop a comment below and let us know what you want to see next.